Most people think of explosives as a sudden flash and a loud boom. But the story of explosives isn't just about destruction. It's a long, strange journey that begins with fireworks and ends with debates about ethics, politics, and the future of war. Stay with me as we uncover the hidden history of how these innovations didn't just change battlefields, but shape the very world we live in. Before I dive too far, imagine an early chemist in a dim lab, peering at a volatile liquid in a glass vial. He knows it's powerful, but he doesn't yet know what that power will mean. We'll come back to that chemist later, because his discovery pushes the story into a new age. Let's dive in. The beginning is almost accidental. In China more than 1,000 years ago, alchemists mixed chemicals while searching for medicines and long life. They were trying to turn lead into gold, to make potions that cured all ills. Instead, they mixed saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal and created a black powder that burned faster and brighter than anything they'd seen. At first, it was used for celebration and ritual. Fireworks to light up the sky and flares to send signals. People used it to scare off evil spirits and to mark festivals. Imagine the first crowd seeing rockets streak across the night sky. To them, it must have felt like touching the heavens. Slowly, the secret moved west. Traders, travelers, and scholars carried recipes and ideas along the Silk Road. As the powder reached the Islamic world and then Europe, people began to see new uses. Someone discovered that when this mixture was confined in a tube and ignited, it could push a projectile out of that tube. What began as a spectacle turned into a tool of war. Hand cannons and early bombards were crude and unpredictable, but they changed the rules of siege warfare. Stone walls that had stood for centuries could be pierced. Castles and fortified towns were suddenly vulnerable in ways they had never been before. Picture the battlefield of the late Middle Ages. Knights on horseback, armored and confident. Now imagine the thunder of a cannon echoing across the field, smoke filling the air, a stone ball smashing into a wall that was thought unbreakable. That sound marked the end of an era. The castle, once a symbol of power and safety, was no longer invincible. The psychology of war shifted forever. As cannons improved, so did the social order. The days when a castle's strength decided who ruled began to fade. Armies needed guns, trained crews, and money to cast and repair artillery. Kings and central governments who could fund and organize such resources grew stronger. The era of the knight in shining armor gave way to professional soldiers and state-backed military power. In short, gunpowder didn't just change how battles were fought. It changed how states were built. But explosives were not only for war. Miners discovered that controlled blasts could break rock faster than laborious chiseling. Engineers used explosives to build roads, tunnels, and canals that were once impossible. The same force that destroyed also opened new possibilities for industry and transport. Explosives became tools of progress as much as instruments of war. That double life, destructive and constructive, is a theme that runs through the whole history. By the Renaissance, gunpowder had become part of everyday military life. Muskets and cannons dominated battlefields, replacing swords and arrows. But it wasn't just soldiers who felt the impact. Civilians, cities, and economies were reshaped by the rise of this new power. Wars became larger, costlier, and more devastating. Rulers taxed more heavily to fund armies, and the balance of power across Europe tilted toward those who could afford to stockpile powder and metal. A new arms race had begun centuries before the modern world knew the term. In the 19th century, chemistry pushed explosives into a new, more dangerous phase. Scientists were searching for stronger, more reliable materials than black powder. They discovered new chemical compounds that released far more energy. One of those discoveries produced a very powerful but extremely unstable liquid. Handling it was risky. It could detonate unexpectedly. This is where the image of our chemist comes back. He sees a bottle that seems to hold a thunderbolt. That discovery opens the door to a new kind of explosive power, if someone can find a way to make it safe to use. Alfred Nobel enters the scene at this point. He saw both the danger and the potential. Nobel worked to stabilize these powerful substances so they could be handled, shipped, and used for industry. His invention, dynamite, made it possible to blast tunnels and mines on a scale that was previously unimaginable. With dynamite, engineers dug canals, built railways through mountains, and opened resources that powered industrial growth. Picture the Panama Canal, the railroads through the Alps, or tunnels cutting through solid stone. None of that would have been possible without controlled explosives. But there was a dark side. Making powerful explosives safer for work also made them easier to adapt for war. Soldiers no longer relied only on gunpowder. They had grenades, stronger shells, and demolition charges. Nobel himself worried about the legacy of his invention. His solution was the Nobel Prizes, designed to reward those who advanced humanity instead of destroying it. Even in his lifetime, he seemed to know that dynamite had placed the world at a crossroads, one path toward progress, the other toward destruction. The 20th century magnified explosive power dramatically. World War I showed what happens when explosives are produced and used in industrial quantities. Artillery barrages could now level landscapes and obliterate trenches. Factories churned out shells by the millions. Entire regions of France and Belgium were turned into cratered wastelands. The sound of shell fire became the background noise of life at the front. The lessons were bitter and costly. Explosives could make wars longer and bloodier, not shorter or decisive. Then, in the middle of the 20th century, science changed the game again with nuclear fission. Suddenly, the energy released by splitting the atom dwarfed anything that chemical explosives could do. The atomic bombs dropped in 1945 ended the Second World War and began a new era in which nations measured power not just in tanks or guns, but in yields of megatons. A single bomb could destroy a city. For the first time in history, humanity had built a weapon capable of ending civilization. The Cold War that followed pushed countries to develop ever more powerful weapons, while also creating systems of deterrence. A tense balance in which the risk of mutual destruction shaped international politics for decades. Still, explosives kept evolving in other ways. Engineers learned to shape blasts, to focus energy where it would do the most work and the least unintended harm. Shaped charges, for instance, could cut metal cleanly. Controlled demolition techniques cleared unsafe structures without endangering nearby buildings. In mining, more precise blasting made operations faster and safer. Rockets, a form of controlled explosive reaction, carried people into space. So the same science that powers weapons also drives exploration and construction. Modern warfare tried to be more precise. Guided weapons and better targeting aimed to reduce civilian casualties, focusing destructive power on military objectives. That technology also made war easier to wage in some ways, raising ethical questions about when and why force should be used. Meanwhile, the rise of non-state actors and improvised devices forced militaries and police to develop new detection, protection, and neutralization methods. The world learned again that technology is not morally neutral. How it is used matters. All this led governments and international bodies to try to regulate and control the use of the most dangerous materials. Treaties, conventions, and export controls emerged to limit certain weapons and to set norms for behavior in war. But regulation often lagged behind innovation. New threats demanded new laws, and the political will to enforce them was not always present. The legacy of past conflicts still lingers. Unexploded shells in former battlefields, environmental damage from testing and mining, and communities that have paid a heavy price for weapons developed decades ago. Today, explosives are everywhere in daily life and industry, from the demolition of unsafe buildings to the carefully controlled blasts that make tunnels and highways possible. They are also at the heart of the rockets that launch satellites and people into orbit. At the same time, the danger of misuse remains. Combating that misuse, through better detection, smarter policy, and international cooperation, is a constant challenge. Think again about that chemist with the volatile vial. His moment captures the whole story. A discovery made in curiosity and danger, transformed by human ingenuity into tools that can build mountains or level cities. The question we keep facing is how to manage power once we find it. Will we use it to create, or will we let it become an instrument of harm? Explosives are, in the end, a mirror. They show us what imagination and risk can produce, progress and destruction braided together. The history of explosives teaches that every technical advance carries a moral decision. As new materials and systems appear, society will again be asked to balance the benefits against the risks. That choice, between harnessing power to improve life or to endanger it, is the real legacy of this story. When you watch a demolition crew bring down an old building or see rockets launch into the sky, remember how many people, experiments, and decisions led to that moment. From fireworks in ancient festivals to the complex, dangerous technologies of today, the evolution of explosives is a human story. Loud, messy, and far from finished. By the way, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to Invention Flex and check out the next recommended video waiting for you here on the channel. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.